this fall. Experience the film. Critics are saying, who made this? Spine-chilling, cringy, and a little erotic.
I think the barking is coming from inside the house. What the heck?
Don't miss What the Dog Doing on Elm Street.
Let's give a big round of applause for Nolan, the Freddy Krueger dog. Good job. You had me frightened. I think we have a real career here. You're sick of the hat, aren't you? He's throwing away his career right now. How could you? This was your starring role, Nolan. Good Boy follows the story of Indy the dog who recently moves in to a new home with his owner. Everything seems to be going just fine until Indy starts noticing paranormal things happening, making him worried for his owner. And that's all. Pretty second any spoilers, you guys. This will be a spoiler-free review. Good Boy. This was one of those horror movies I was highly anticipating for pretty obvious reasons. Some might call it a gimmick, but whatever. It's a gimmick that I think is really cool. Once you were told that this is like a paranormal activity movie from the perspective of a dog, one, if you're a dog lover like I am, I think it instantly makes you want to go watch this. But also, two, just from the filmmaking perspective aspect, could that actually hold weight? Will it end up feeling just like a gimmick in that, oh, good idea in theory, but should have been like a 10-15 minute short film instead? I know this movie went viral online for several different reasons because of its premise, and people even Googling online, does the dog in Good Boy die? People don't like to see dogs in movies die. And I understand no one wants to see a good puppy die. And then a lot of the early buzz for this movie was coming out where it held a really high Rotten Tomatoes score. A lot of my movie mutuals were hyping it up, talking it up, saying this is one of the most unique and best horror movies of this year. I was like, okay, really, I want to tame my expectations, but dang, you're selling me on this. So went out to go see it for the earliest showtime in my local theater. And okay, I think I am going to agree this is definitely unique, and I would even say brilliant, but I think a lot of people are not going to be able to appreciate this movie and will actually be pretty bored with it. There are a couple of reasons I'm going to feel that way. So for one, this unfortunately is going to be one of those situations where the movie has just been so hyped up or went so viral, it's taken on a life of its own, and what you think this movie isn't really that. I'll get into what I mean by that without really getting into spoilers, but get into the things I really did like about this movie is, dude, Indy the dog deserves all the treats in the world because his performance is what carries the movie, and I didn't really ever think I could say that, you know? Sometimes when watching a horror movie or even just any movie where there's a dog involved, you can kind of picture what they're doing behind the camera or around them to get the dog to react a certain way. And while there are definitely things I can imagine they did, and there's even at the end a kind of like behind the scenes of what they had to do to get the dog to do certain things, it's still pretty cool how you can watch this completely from the perspective of the dog and entirely know what they're feeling or thinking in that moment. There's no CGI used on the dog. There's not that weird effect that they did in some of those Air Bud movies or other dog movies where they have their lips moving to talk, you know, that creepy thing they do sometimes. Probably shouldn't do that motion a lot. No, it's all just relying on this dog, its face, its whimpers, its expressions to carry it, and I thought that was a real big achievement, understanding that dogs are some of the toughest things to deal with on a movie set. But the biggest positive about this movie, and the thing that makes me lean towards this being kind of brilliant, is this is a horror movie for dogs, okay? I need you to think about what I just said and those words. A horror movie for dogs. This isn't like Hotel for Dogs where it's a movie about dogs that humans can enjoy. No, to me, this is a movie. If dogs were like Planet of the Apes style, able to like walk around, talk, when they'd go to work the weekend after this movie came out, they'd hang around the cooler with a little cup and be like, hey, you catch that Good Boy movie? Frightening, terrifying. Perfectly captured our fear. And that's, I think, so interesting because yes, as a human, you're watching it and you're understanding what's going on, but the real horror and frightening part of this movie isn't even the thing that they're selling to you, and that'll kind of be the crutch or the make or break thing about this movie, because I think a lot of people are going in thinking, oh, it's going to be like Paranormal Activity or The Conjuring, but the dog is the main character, right? At least that's the idea a lot of people have going into this, and if you do have that mindset, I think you are going to be very let down by this movie. You're going to be bored throughout it. And I've already seen a couple of reviews who have gone to go see it, calling it a snooze fest. And I don't blame them for that because it is a very slow movie. It's only 73 minutes long, which is a pretty short runtime for a lot of movies. That's an hour and 13 minutes, but let me tell you, doesn't really feel that short. It does feel like it's at least an hour 30 when watching the movie. And I think that is because of the limitations of only so much you can do when the dog is the main character. Only so much dialogue can be said, only so much story can be thrown out there, and a lot of it just relies on dog whimpering, looking back and forth, going to this room, going to that room. And some of that gets a little repetitive and slightly exhausting. In fact, I will say for the first 20, maybe even 30 minutes of this movie, I thought I was gonna have to be the sour pussycat. That was gonna be like, dang, dude, I'm gonna have to be the one guy to be honest and be like, this movie isn't really that. It is a gimmick. It's not that interesting. What are they doing? People just hyping this up because it's a dog? And then a little bit after the 20, 30-minute mark, it clicked to me what is actually going on in this movie, and it completely changed my perspective on this film and made me appreciate and like it so much more. I don't want to go into what this ulterior thing going on, but there is something else going on in this movie, and the movie makes it, I think, pretty clear. I want to act like I'm the smart guy going, oh, I figured it out. I know the real meaning of this movie, and you chumps, y'all didn't. I think the movie makes it obvious enough to what is actually going on in this movie and the deeper meaning behind everything we're witnessing, but there are going to be some people that just look at this surface level. A lot of what's actually going on in this movie flies over their heads, and they're going to be the ones most disappointed, most upset with this movie. But if you are one of those people who happens to catch what's actually going on in this movie, well, then you will really see this as a pretty heartbreaking, so sad, and pretty brilliant movie. It's such an interesting way to go about making a horror movie where the dog is the main character. It makes a lot more sense once you figure out what's going on and why the dog was chosen to be the main character. But that in itself is really what drove the movie for me. Has me still thinking about it right now. Even kind of changed the perspective of the way I see my dogs at home, because the thing that's happening in this movie, you wonder, does this happen a lot everywhere else for other dogs? And yeah, I think the ending of this movie does leave kind of a gut punch. The actual thing going on in this movie puts it so much more above to what the movie was actually sold to be. And it's such a unique idea that it makes me almost wants to do a spoiler review just talking about what the movie is actually about, because that then opens the door for so much more conversation, gives you different ideas and viewpoints of what certain scenes actually meant. And that's really what made me like and overall enjoy this movie. It is still a film I think is tough to recommend because it is slower paced, not a lot goes on in between scenes, and if you are just wanting that supernatural ghost entity thing to be the main draw and have this dog somehow be the savior, create sort of like a Courage the Cowardly Dog episode, it's not gonna be that. The movie's actually a lot more grounded than you think. There's still a lot of supernatural things and creepy entities about in this movie, but put into the context of what's actually happening in this movie, it makes it all that more heartbreaking as opposed to terrifying. But even then, I'll also be honest with myself. I don't know if it's so much a movie I would ever really rewatch again, unless it's to see it with someone else and be like, did you get what was actually going on? Did you understand? And then have a conversation on that. I don't know if this is something I'd really go back to, but it's still a unique and such an interesting movie. I think it does outdo its gimmick. It's not just a gimmick film. It has something to say, and in doing that, it outdoes this whole, oh, what if a dog could see a ghost? What would that do? Just kind of tame expectations a little. So when it comes to Good Boy, I'm going to give Action 1 star. This is entirely from the perspective of a dog. There is sometimes creepy things going on and entities that are chasing the dog. Movie tries to do a good job of creating that panic a dog would feel when there's so much sensory going on, but it's still a much slower paced movie, and there's not a lot going on throughout most of the movie. Comedy in the movie, I'm gonna give it 1 star. There's only a couple of jokes said throughout there, mainly from the owner of the dog, who was able to give us a lot of dialogue and move the plot forward a little bit, but it's not a very jokey movie. Drama in the film, I'm gonna give it 3.5 stars. Like I said, for the first 25, 30 minutes, I was thinking, I'm just not gonna enjoy this movie. I think the gimmick didn't work, and there's only so much you can do. But once it clicked what was actually going on, and the metaphor for what this movie kind of was, really made it so much more to me and was really pulling at my heartstrings. Suspense the movie, I'm gonna give it 2.5 stars. Unfortunately, I do think there's a repetitive and almost exhausting factor with the way the scares are built up in here. You're not really on the edge of your seat for much of the movie because the plot moves so slow. Horror in the movie, I'm gonna give it 2.5 stars. I don't think this is particularly a movie that'll terrify you, give you a lot of jump scares, or leave you feeling creepy. I think it's more of a movie that tries to hit you emotionally, but it is still kind of scary to think about when you put yourself in the mind of what the dog's going through. When looking at the 3Cs, I think it's obvious the critics are going to be the one to most enjoy this movie. Casuals, I think, will be looking at its surface level and look at it like another movie that was overhyped by online people and don't get what everyone's talking about. Some cinephiles might enjoy it, but again, because it's a slower paced movie, they'll be left slightly bored with it. And critics, once understanding the deeper meaning behind the movie, will really appreciate what's going on. So when it comes to Good Boy, while this is still a movie I highly recommend you at least check out once, I don't know if I could say rush out to see it in a theater, especially knowing that it's by Shudder and it'll be streaming soon. I think the best time to watch it and give it a chance to see if you appreciate what's going on will be to rent or stream it at home.
That'll do, Donkey. That'll do.
Again, that's just my opinion on the movie, guys. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. If you've seen the movie and you think you know this deeper meaning that I don't really think is that hard to solve. I'm acting like it's such a hard thing to figure out when I think it's pretty easy if you're paying attention. Does that make the movie more interesting for you, or would you have rather have been more of a straight up supernatural dog versus ghost kind of movie? Anything, everything, be sure to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at 3C Films or on TikTok at 3C Films. But as always, I'm Chris. Take care.